Chapter 16. Captured. We only managed 5 or 6 miles that day. The food that we received from the kind and mysterious residents of Shendar Marsh was incredibly helpful in strengthening our weak bodies, but we still had a ways to go before we felt like we were back at full capacity. We talked a lot about what happened to me during the lost week in the village. Kirill kept wondering if it all meant something more, like maybe there was a hidden message in it. I didn't think so, but I let him populate as many different interpretations as he wanted. It helped to pass the time. I still was confused as to why Vosh had remained for the 7 days that we were gone. It just didn't sit right with me. And yet he seemed so focused on being with us and helping us. His reason of getting back at Jack left me unconvinced, though at face value it made sense. Having no solid reasons to ask him to leave, we kept him with us. Still, we all kept one wary eye on him. If he noticed it, he didn't let on. "We should be coming across more populated areas from now on," he stated. After leaving Boren's house in the valley, we had seen very little civilization. However, we knew that we would have to be on our guard even more now that we were getting closer to Jack's center of operations. We camped that night under the trees. Had I known that this would be my last night camping, I would have tried to appreciate the stars in the night sky or the sounds of the forest more. But exhaustion quickly overcame all of us, and we were asleep long before the fire died down. We awoke early the next morning and had a nourishing meal of smoked meats and bread, as well as some fresh berries that Bog found in the woods. We packed our remaining things and headed off again on the trail. It wasn't long before we could see another town in the distance. "That's Reed," Bosch informed us. "It's the last of the southeastern arm of the kingdom. Shendar Marsh used to be the last until it was destroyed 60 years ago. I guess it will have to be included once again." "Maybe they don't want to be," I suggested. "Oh, I don't think they'll have a choice," Vosh replied. "Once the king and the Foten find out about its restoration, they'll be all over its inclusion again. Wouldn't want to miss out on all those lovely taxes and potential military personnel." "Well, they won't learn about it from us," I declared. "If Shendar Marsh wants to remain unknown, then I would like to give them as much time as possible." Everyone agreed to my sentiments. How interesting that I wanted to protect the very town that only days before I had wanted protection from. Things can change so quickly. As we approached Reed, we formulated a game plan. "Whatever we do," offered Kirill, "we have got to keep a low profile. It has been 12 days since the Foten attacked us in the valley, and I'm sure there are strong suspicions that their attack failed. I wouldn't be surprised if we were being looked for even now." "Do you think they know who to look for?" I asked. "I mean, they wouldn't know what you guys look like or whether or not Boren was with us. And they certainly shouldn't know anything about Vosh." "But if they're working with Jack, they might have a pretty good description of you," Kirill pointed out. I hadn't thought of that. "Still, there's no reason to think that Jack even suspects that we're together," I countered. "For all he knows, Father and I disappeared back into the threshold. Whatever the case may be, we can't draw any attention to ourselves." "Do we even have to go into Reed?" "It'd be good to get a handle on what has transpired with Jack since he arrived. I'm sure that the gossip has spread down the southeastern arm by now." "Maybe we should split up," suggested Vosh. I felt a twinge of uneasiness at Vosh's suggestion, mostly because it was Vosh who suggested it. It made sense in that we would be less noticeable traveling in pairs than in a foursome, but it would have been easier to swallow if it had come from Bog or Kirill. The brothers seemed to be feeling the same hesitation, but I could tell they also saw the wisdom of it. "Okay," agreed Kirill. "Bog, Taryn and I will go in first. You and Vosh follow about a half hour later." This seemed to sit fine with Vosh and Bog. Sat fine with me. I knew that Bog could take care of himself and that Vosh couldn't do anything to me if we were separated. So having made our plan, we proceeded to execute it immediately. We agreed to meet on the far side of town in a little over an hour. The intent was to find out as much as we could while remaining as inconspicuous as possible. With the final wave, Kirill and I headed out and approached the town of Reed. It was larger than Shendar Marsh, but similarly arranged. As it was now about mid-morning, the town was alive and bustling with activity. No one took any particular notice of us as we meandered down the street. Kirill indicated a tavern across the way and suggested that we go in there for a drink. It was still quite early, but it seemed to be doing good business already, so I agreed. We entered and found ourselves at a table close to the bar. We ordered some eggs and bread, even though we weren't all that hungry. The tavern keeper also brought us a steaming pot of some kind of tea. It smelled quite strong, but its flavor was pleasing, and the warmth was a definite blessing. We were able to overhear quite a lot of conversation without appearing to be eavesdropping. We learned some relatively useless bits of information about crop production and the price of hay, as well as about someone named Gorel who was sick. But we also picked up some very helpful news about Jack. Apparently he was styling himself as Tanjak now, King Tanjak, and he was conscripting men for an upcoming battle. It was clear that he was moving ahead with his plans, although how he was going to get all those giants out of Terrace, through the threshold, and back into Earth was beyond me. We stayed for a little under an hour, and then, after paying for our meal and thanking the tavern keeper, we continued our sortie. We arrived on the far side of Reed without having discovered much else, and found Bog and Vosh already there. We exchanged information. They hadn't found out as much as we did, but they did notice a heightened sense of expectation and excitement everywhere. There had been no talk of the Photon, and for that we were grateful. We passed through other tiny settlements as we continued on our way. Often we would circle around them, avoiding any contact whatsoever. Around dinner time we came to the next main town of the southeastern arm, Eain Hill. It was located on a steep embankment, and from a distance the buildings all appeared to be built on top of each other. We revisited our plan to split up, and this time it was Bog and I who went in together first, followed later by Kirill and Vosh. Vosh knew of an inn in town that we could stay at. It was called the Barrow. Sleeping inside that night was appealing to all of us after the last couple weeks of camping, and we agreed to book rooms there. Bog and I took our time checking into the Barrow. We got some food from a street vendor, ate while we walked around the lower sections of town. There were some rough-looking characters down there, but with Bog at my side, looking so enormously imposing, no one gave us any trouble. I smiled to myself, knowing Bog's kind nature, but I also comforted myself by remembering that he really wasn't someone to be messed with. It was getting dark when we finally approached the inn. Upon entering, we noticed Kirill and Vosh sitting at a table, eating. We went to the counter and inquired about a room.
"This is your lucky night," stated the innkeeper good-naturedly. "With all that has been going on at the castle, I could have booked up almost every night with young conscripts passing through. But tonight, I have one room left. You heading to sign up for the battle as well?"
"Yes," I lied. "We can't wait to see some action."
"I bet he could provide a lot of action," the innkeeper said, sizing up Bog. "I'd hate to have to go up against that in battle."
He handed us a key, and with a subtle nod at Kirill and Vosh, we headed upstairs to our room. It was a comfortable room with 2 large beds. There was a small table with an unlit candle on it. From the window we could look down on the village spread out below us. Bog seemed satisfied with the arrangement and lay down on the bed closest to the door. He gave a great sigh and smiled contentedly.
"Finally, a good night's sleep," he said.
I laughed at him. "What, you getting soft on me now?" I teased. There was a knock at the door and Kirill's voice came through the wood. "Open up." I opened the door and Kirill and Vosh entered. "A closet?" Kirill observed right away. "How come we didn't get the deluxe room?" "Saved the best for the best, I guess," I joked. Kirill flopped down on my bed while Vosh took the chair. I stood looking out the window. "So what's the plan for tomorrow?" I asked. "Tomorrow we try to find out a bit more about what Jack is planning," Kirill replied. "Also, I wouldn't mind some news as to what the Photon are up to." "How are we supposed to do that?" It was Vosh who answered. "Well, there's supposed to be some type of propaganda meeting tomorrow in the town hall. I guess Jack is less than satisfied with the numbers of men that have joined his army and is wanting to, how did the innkeeper put it, inspire more men to come. There may even be some Photon in attendance to assist with the encouragement, to make it rather difficult to refuse." "I thought that maybe Bog and I should go to that," put in Kirill. "I'm afraid it's too likely that both you and Vosh might be recognized. Tomorrow's market day. Maybe you two could go and snoop around there for any tidbits of information." That seemed like a solid plan. With the Photon preoccupied at the assembly, I felt relatively safe with Vosh walking around the market. We spent another hour or so putting together thoughts for the next day, and then, after Vosh and Kirill left for their room, Bog and I got ready to call it a night. The room was dark, and I was just about to fall asleep when I heard Bog's voice in the stillness. "Just watch your back." "What do you mean? What are you scared of?" "I don't know. I just don't have a good feeling about this place. I especially don't like leaving you with Vosh, but Kirill's right about you guys possibly being noticed. Just don't ever lower your guard." "It'll be okay," I encouraged him, and I honestly believed it would. We fell asleep with that thought in our minds, a thought that was as comforting as it was mistaken. The next morning was cloudy and a slight rain was falling. After a quick breakfast of some boiled oats, we parted ways and headed out to our prearranged destinations. Despite the weather, the market was open for business. It reminded me of the market back in Corn, and of course that made me think of Toll. I missed him terribly in that moment. I couldn't help judging the market with Toll's critical eye. I could almost hear his voice. "Never put fish next to fabrics," he would say, or "Why put all the leather workers in one area? Split them up, increase their profile." As we walked around this market, I wondered if every market was essentially the same. Of course, there were some different things for sale here in Terrace that we didn't have on Earth, and vice versa, but overall it seemed so familiar. Clothes for the body, food for the stomach, seed for the field, and the added non-necessities that every civilization everywhere seemed to make the most profit on. And the vendors were all similar as well. Sure, these vendors were much larger than our people back in Corona, but they still had that too-friendly smile and the never-fading excitement to have you see and, more importantly, buy their product. We wandered around the rather large gathering of makeshift booths and tables, pretending interest and listening in on as many conversations as possible. However, at the market, there was one thing that was of paramount importance to everyone, and that was the market. Nothing compared to selling this sweater or that bit of jewelry. Nothing was of greater consequence than getting this pie for that much or that plant for this much. Things like wars and kings, battles and conquests were fine for other places and other times, but this was market day, and that trumped all else. We began looking together, but as often happens in these types of settings, Vosh and I quickly moved apart from each other. Our curiosities ran in different directions, and we naturally gravitated to the places that would satiate them. I got to thinking of Bog and Kirill and wondered how they were faring. What news were they gathering from the assembly? It would be good to have some more concrete data about Jack and his plans. The more we knew, the better prepared we would be for when we arrived at his castle. It didn't make the challenge ahead of us that much more achievable, but every little bit of information we had could help. And who knew? Maybe they would discover something that would really give us an edge. My thoughts shifted to Vosh. I found myself wondering more and more about him as well. Who was he really? It had been 10 days since we first caught him spying on us in the Kodish Mountains, and since then he had been a model traveling companion. He had pulled his weight in every way and never did anything to arouse suspicion. However, Bog's words kept playing over and over in my mind, and I couldn't argue the wisdom in his warning. I glanced around to try and catch a glimpse of him, but couldn't see him. Thinking he must have just moved to a booth somewhere out of eyesight, I didn't allow the initial wave of concern to affect me. Instead, I wandered more purposefully back in the direction I had last seen him. Although the market was large, it was still possible to navigate around the entire setup in less than 15 minutes. I made my way as naturally as possible through the market, politely ignoring the enticements of the sellers and excusing myself around the other shoppers. When I arrived back to my starting point, having not encountered Vosh, small alarm bells started ringing in my head. I thought that perhaps he was moving in the same direction as me and looking for me as well, so I turned around and backtracked through my previous route. Still, no sign of him. Now I really began to worry. I felt my palms begin to sweat. What was Vosh up to? Was he waiting until this moment to set me up? I wondered if I should leave right then to go and find Bog and Kirill, but I knew that the potential for discovery at the assembly was too great. I turned around in a full circle, half looking for Vosh, half deciding what my next move should be. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I caught a glimpse of him disappearing down an alley between two buildings that stood just outside the perimeter of the market. Immediately I ran off after him. I accidentally bumped into several people on my way out, but ignored their angry words and glances, and kept moving in the direction of the alley. When I arrived, the alley was empty. Again I was torn as to what I should do. Leaving the market and rushing off blindly down strange back streets was completely off plan. But if Vosh was up to something, I had to find out what it was. I was sure that Kirill and Bog would understand and agree. They would probably have done the exact same thing. I looked back at the market. It carried on as if I had never been there. The commotion I caused with my exit quickly swallowed up in the name of profit. With a final sigh, I plunged into the alley. It led out into one of the lower sections of town that Bog and I explored earlier, though I didn't recognize any landmarks. There were several possible ways I could go, and I wasn't sure which one to take. I was just going to decide on the first street to my left when I heard a cry from one off to my right. My gut told me that it had something to do with Vosh. Without any further delay, I sprinted off in its direction. It didn't take long before I saw him. He was being shepherded roughly down the street by two burly-looking giants. It became clear immediately that he wasn't happy about what was happening to him. Instantly, my distrust of him was replaced by a need to rescue him. Yelling, I pulled up my sword and charged. The two men turned to look at me. I could tell that they were surprised to find out that Vosh wasn't alone. Vosh screamed at me in warning, but it was too late. From out of nowhere, I was hit from behind and went flying onto the ground. My sword clattered away from me. Before I could regain my footing or even turn to see what had hit me, a heavy burlap sack was thrown over my head and strong arms pinned me to the ground. The last thing I saw before the sack covered my eyes was an obese giant stooping down to pick up my fallen sword and looking questioningly at me.